to that major election happening in a matter of hours. Nigerians will head to the polls to elect a new president to lead them for the next 4 years. We have all the analysis on this for you, but already the terminals here in Accra are empty in the capital as Nigeria shuts its borders ahead of the polls. If you're not already in, you may find it difficult to do so. Before all of these analyses, my colleague Mapitso Sibidi was at the transport terminal here in Accra to check out the situation.
Thomas and John, and we're going to discuss the Nigerian elections as the country goes to the polls tomorrow. What has been the assessment of the current, the ruling party? I'll start with you, John. First of all, let's take a look back at Buhari's administration and your thoughts on it so far.
So far, what I have to say about the Buhari administration in Nigeria, in fact, there's nothing good to write about it since ever. I have not seen such a thing in Nigeria. But what we are seeing this time around is something as insecurity everywhere. There's crises everywhere, killings, a lot of killings from the east, from the north, from the west. In fact, the issue of the election, we pray, let God help us for the election. Because the election, we don't know how the outcome, we don't know how it's going to end tomorrow, but I believe God that God will do everything.
So is there a reason why you are not going tomorrow? Or today?
Yes, the problem is just I was supposed to be in for the election, but the only little challenge I had was I was attacked by robbers and they made away with my bag and my PVC, so I was not able to cast my vote. That was all.
Okay. So Thomas, your thoughts on the APC and Buhari's administration so far in the 8 years?
For the past 8 years, the things in Nigeria is not moving as it was. Jonathan, many people have been complaining about Jonathan, but things were moving well. But this APC did not go well, especially the entail of the tunnel house, where money scarcity. Very, very, very tedious and serious matter in Nigeria, as I'm speaking. You have money in bank, you cannot withdraw money. You go to ATM and people are crying, fighting up and down. To get their own money, you will not get it. Before you get money, you have to use money to buy money in Nigeria. In fact, at the moment, Nigeria is facing a lot of challenges. So we pray to Almighty God. The election should go smoothly tomorrow, and Nigeria should wisely vote for the choice. Yeah. That is what.
Talking about their choice, who do you think might take it?
Oh, well, the majority of the Nigerians prefer P2B, but politics in Africa as well. It's a different game entirely.
So, who do you think might take it tomorrow?
My prayer is for P2B to take it, because we need somebody who will come and rescue us from this mess. Because what we are seeing, in fact, this time around we are not talking about a party. The party is a different thing. We are talking about a candidate who have the masses in mind, who can give us what we want. We need P2B. We need P2B, and we want him to come and rescue us out of it.
The concerns here on the streets of Accra by the Nigerians. Here's what we know. 94 million citizens in 36 states who are eligible to vote and will be required to select a president from 18 candidates, of which only 3 are key contenders. Then we have 18 presidential candidates, 3 top candidates there in your shots. Peter Obi, you have Atiku Abubakar, and of course the former Lagos governor in your pictures there. But beyond that as well, there are other issues that you need to know about. In the Senate itself, 109 seats, 360 in the House of Representatives for the Nigerian legislature. So those are some of the facts we know about the details of Parliament or its legislative architecture there in Nigeria. And that's where, of course, a lot more is happening as well. That unfortunate news that we heard of about one of the candidates going into the Senate being burnt to death together with his aide, unfortunately. But here's what we also know about, for instance, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who's the candidate for the All Progressives Congress. So he was senator 1992 to 1993, also one-time former governor of Lagos, as I was indicating, in 1999 to 2007, a co-founder of the All Progressives Congress, APC, in 2013. And he goes out to say that, for instance, well, he personally made President Buhari the president of the state, a reason for which he's confident going into the elections. He was also one-time governor of the state of Lagos from 1999 to 2007, and the first presidential election run. So let's also talk about the others in the race, the top three as we're focusing on, because there's also Atiku Abubakar, one-time vice president of the country, 1999 to 2007, but he's made several attempts. He was also the national vice chairperson of the People's Front of Nigeria in 1989. He started his journey quite long and was one-time governor of the Adamawa state in 1999. And the fifth presidential election run, 1993, 2007, 2011, 2015, and the infamous 2019 elections, of course. But he's making another attempt here again. And then there's the new phase, breakaway man, as some will call him, but of course he's the well known as the former governor of the Anambra state between 2006 2014, and the youngest ever chairperson of a Nigerian bank, that's Fidelity Bank, and the best performing governor on the issue of immunization in southeast Nigeria in 2012. So those are the credentials of Peter Obi, of course, attempting to break the duopoly in Nigeria. In all, 93.4 million eligible voters, 18 presidential candidates going into this contest, and it does assure you that there's a lot going into these elections. We're not ending in a matter of a day or two. And that's why Nigeria is so much of essence to not just the country itself, but the West Africa sub-region, because whatever happens to that polls has an implication for the entire region. Here's how the polls are conducted in the Nigerian presidential elections. The president is elected using a modified two-round system. To be selected or elected in the first round, a candidate must receive some sort of plurality of the valid votes and over 25% in at least 24 of the entire 36 states. If no candidate passes this threshold, a second round will be held that should happen between the top candidate and the next candidate to have received a majority of votes on the highest number of states. Now, the 109 members of the Senate are elected from 109 single-seat constituencies, 3 in each state and 1 for the Federal Capital Territory. So it's the first-past-the-post voting system which takes place there, but not the same as what happens to the presidential. Now, the 360 members of the House of Representatives are equally elected by the first-past-the-post voting or polling in the single-member constituency. So that's why we're having the conversation today. Why does the Nigerian election matter to us so much, and what's its relevance to the West African sub-region? We can now bring in some analysts who are helping us to do the discussions here on the polls. We'll tell you about the analysts joining us shortly, but just a recap of some of the issues coming up shortly. You need to pay attention to the voter population of some 90 that's over 90 million people voting in the elections. And we do also know that they're using the first-past-the-post system for the legislative elections as well. Let's speak to Chukwuemeka Eze. He's joining us. Nigeria obviously is facing a host of challenges, as we know, Chukwuemeka Eze. But of course, the elections will be up in a matter of 24 hours. First of all, tell us about the mood in Nigeria and what's happening ahead of the elections. Chukwuemeka, if you can hear me, I'm just asking about the mood in the country right now ahead of the crucial elections.
Okay, hi, good afternoon. The name is Electoral, so just to be sure. I don't know if you can hear me.
Kelechuku, I can hear you. Apologies for that. Of course, we also need to tell you that Kelechuku is an analyst at the SBM Intelligence in Nigeria. He's also joining the conversation. Chukwuemeka appears to have some challenges. But Kelechuku, if you can hear me, just go ahead. You're talking about the mood in Nigeria as we speak.
Okay, sorry, I did not know I was not the only one on the call. Okay, so like you pointed out, a candidate from the Labour Party was murdered. I think that was on Wednesday in Enugu. And we've been seeing reports of sporadic attacks across. There was an attack in Rivers State in South Nigeria on a particular radio station there. So there's some sporadic violence that's been reported, but largely people are stocking up, and we predict that there could be runoff. So people are just, because people already know that this is going to be a closely contested election, and so everyone is stocking up and just basically trying to stay within their communities and to not get caught up in any situation that might occur. And security agents have been deployed across the country, and campaign has now stopped. Everyone is waiting to see what happens.
We'll get into the demographics of those elections, but how are the security arrangements, even before we get into the figures?
So, like I said, there's been a mixture of army and police officers across different parts of the state. That's usually what happens across even state elections in the country. There's always heavy deployment of security. So that's usually the security arrangement, basically a joint arrangement between all the security forces, and like you reported, border closures, and so yeah, that's what it is.
The over 90 million population. Usually, what happens? Well, this is the first time you're having this number, but giving the obvious huge figures that you deal with in terms of the voter population in Nigeria, how is the process conducted in such a manner that will ensure convenience? By the way, I'm just imagining that.
Before, like, are you speaking of what happens on election day?
Yes, precisely. In terms of the numbers, because now we are dealing with a population of over 90 million. It's the first time you're having that number, but not the first time we're having or seeing such a significant population going to an elections within the sub-region. I'm just asking about the process. Usually, what would happen? How does the INEC ensure that there is convenience? People go through the queues easily. I'm just trying to imagine the situation.
So we have basically, first of all, we have over 176,000 polling units for this election. That's to ensure that there are polling units are a bit more accessible and closer to people. Last 4 years ago, I think we had about 170,000 or less. So you could see that there's an increased amount of polling units being made available. We have 93.4 million voters. It was 84 million last time out. The process used to be rigorous. So you have a session where you come for accreditation in the morning, and then you come back in the afternoon to vote. Then card readers were introduced. There were issues with the card readers as well, as to, okay, is it identifying your voter card? Card readers are not identifying people's voter cards. They had to bring out what you call incident forms, and they had to basically try to register people manually. That was really, really rigorous. Someone told me yesterday that if it was the old way, he was not going to vote. But it's not the old way. So what INEC is doing this time around, they are using the bimodal voter accreditation system. And what that does is it identifies your voter card. You bring your voter card, it looks at the voter identification number, then it identifies you either by your fingerprint or facial recognition, and you proceed to vote. And then the accreditation numbers the accreditation numbers are on that tab, the BVAS tab. And when the election results are produced for that polling unit, you use the BVS to stamp it, upload it on INEX viewing portal, and then you make sure. So the accredited voters must tally with what has been snapped by the BVS. If it does not tally, the presiding officer for that polling unit is supposed to nullify that election. So just to answer your point again, what we do is use the delineation of creating new polling units to manage the population size and make sure that polling units are a bit closer to people.
Okay, just hold the lines for us. Let's also hear from Dr. Chukwuemeka Eze. He's the Executive Director for the West African Network for Peace Building, ONEP. Doc, thank you for your time. Nigeria is heading to the polls in just a matter of 24 hours. For you, what's crucial on the agenda? We know that security obviously came up some time ago. The INEC is assuring that there are measures in place to check that.
Well, first of all, is to acknowledge that this is an existential election for the country, and also with some ramifications on the sub-region, considering Nigeria's role, whether in the area of peace and security, or also in the area of deepening democratic practice and democratic ethos around the continent. And so issues around security is further heightened by the already existing vulnerabilities, including issues around kidnapping, banditry, Boko Haram, violent extremism, issues around economic hardship, and so on and so forth. So all this will play its own role and also determine how the citizens go about the attempt to exercise their franchise. But not also forgetting that the frustrations and also the mobilization, as it were, of the thought force is also leading to some kind of new dynamic as it relates to the electoral process.
But then how about the process itself? Well, we're seeing some unique features now. For instance, the emergence of a new force, a third force, if you may want to call them as such, going into the elections. How is that likely to influence the process?
The first thing to acknowledge is how this third force have been able to mobilize voters, especially the young voters. In the past, and I also think that let's not remove the fact that the improvement in the electoral law is also a determinant of how people have been able to key into this electoral process. The trust on the electoral system and the electoral process have increased tremendously because of the new electoral law. And that's also going to determine way and manner people are going to turn out. And therefore, I think that there are a few dynamics that we must look at. Number one is the emergence of the third force. Nobody gave any other political party other than PDP and the a chance. Now they are a force. The second thing is, like I said, the introduction of the new electoral law, which includes also the beavers, and which has increased the trust of the citizens on the electoral process. The third is also some of the elements that have been introduced in the electoral process, including shifting attention from the political parties and the politicians to the citizens as those who will determine the outcome of the election. Then the demography, which is how the young people of Nigeria of between the ages of, I would say between the ages of 18 to maybe 39 or 40, have now become a force that will determine the outcome of this election, especially based on the registration and the PVC collection.
Okay. But then it appears that this time round, the focus on the Senate or the legislative elections has not been that much. Is it because of the kind of traction and competition we're seeing in the presidential race this time round?
Well, I don't think that is the case. You know, most of the senatorial elections, National Assembly elections are focused on constituency. The presidential election is more national in character. And for the first time, a new dynamic that is introduced in the election is that you have 4 geopolitical zones as the front runners in this election. You have Southeast, represented by the Labour Party candidate, Mr. Peter. You have the Northeast, represented by the former Vice President, His Excellency Alhaji Atiku Abubakar. You have the Southwest, represented by former Governor and former Senator Ashwaji Ahmed Bola Tinubu. And then you have the Northwest, represented by former Governor and former Senator Rabiu Kwankwa. So out of the 6 geopolitical zones in the country, you have 4 of them as the front runners. So that's also giving momentum to the electoral process. And then you also have the issues around religion, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. So there is a whole lot of dynamics, including the fact that for the past 8 years, for the first time, President Muhammadu Buhari is not on the ballot paper. So you have entirely new people seeking the employment positions of the president that are coming in from the outside, as it were.
We know that at WANEP, for instance, you have your early warning mechanism. So what's your dashboard telling you about the Nigerian elections?
I think that for us, what we have observed is that the more transparent the process is, irrespective of the frustrations of the politicians, the more likely we are going to have acceptability of the outcome of the election. And I think so far, INEC has proven that it is transparent and ready to conduct this election. The second thing is the professionalism of the security agents. Unfortunately, the security agencies are not just made up of the army and the police. They are also going to be supported by other sister agencies, in which case there will be multiplicity of actors within the security milieu that will help to address security issues in this election. If they also maintain high level of integrity, then it means that the probability for the acceptance of the outcome of the election will be very high. However, if on the other hand, that's our prediction, if on the other hand, there are elements of ambiguity, not in terms of the text of the electoral law, but in terms of the implementation of the electoral law, then it will be an avenue for chaos, especially given that the stakes are so high in this particular election.
But by and large, you expect that process to be very smooth. Let's talk about the implication for the West Africa sub-region itself. Why is the Nigerian election of importance to West Africa?
My brother, I want you to imagine if Nigeria implode tomorrow. Where are the citizens going to be in terms of refugee flow within the sub-region? That's number one. Number two is that Nigeria is no mean player with regards to the economy of the sub-region. So anything that affects the peace and security of the country, especially political instability, will have a toll on the entire region's economic fortunes. And then, of course, the ripple effects of heightened insecurity in Nigeria within the sub-region that is already challenged. The sub-region itself is already challenged, whether it is the Sahel region or the Gulf of Guinea or the Senegambia axis. They are already challenged with a lot of insecurity. So we cannot afford to have any addition to these already existing vulnerabilities, especially as it relates to insecurity and economic hardship.
We would not expect that that process will be smooth, except to say that the complications, the banknotes crisis, fuel crisis, these latest factors appear to be marring that beauty of what would have been a smooth democratic exercise. Should it be of concern to actors in Nigeria?
Well, I think there are two schools of thought to that. The first school of thought thinks that this will lead to voters' apathy. The other school of thought, where I belong to, maintains that this could actually increase, as it were, people's anger to actually go out and vote against or in favor of policies that they don't think meet their expectation. Whichever way it goes, my point, speaking from the point of view of an early warning expert, is that the Nigerian citizens are on the edge. If you take a flashback to what happened during the EndSARS saga, the citizens are on the edge. And therefore, the trigger factors, the indicators that could lead to triggers are so many, because already the environment is fertile for any act of violence. And therefore, whatever the Electoral Commission does, whatever the security agents, whatever the election management bodies as in its entirety does to ensure high level of transparency will go a long way in ensuring that there is no violence in this election.
Okay.
Once it is clear and transparent to everybody, I am almost 100% certain that the Nigerian citizens will accept it as their fate.
Okay, I want to bring in, and Doc, you might just want to hold on for us. Let's bring in Alassane Bello. He's also a political and conflict analyst. Bello, welcome to the show. In fact, the northern dynamics comes to mind, because that's an aspect we've not explored a lot on the show, as to how the northern parts of Nigeria may vote in this election, given the new wave of the third fourth from the likes of Peter Obi. The criticism is, this is the man from the south. How is he going to appeal to the northern part of Nigeria? Well, what's the dynamics really, and break it down for us?
Well, thank you for having me. I think, first of all, the emergence of Peter Obi is not really a surprise. If you realize that in the event of the bad outcome of the NSAS, how the whole incident happened at Lekki Tobut,
Right.
you could see that the youth were angry and were looking for an alternative. So Peter Obi is not really a young person, because he's calling a CC, another pensioner. But relatively, compared to all the other candidates, Peter Obi becomes the only alternative they have. And when you put Atiku and Tinubu in a bracket, Atiku represented the old guard, the old PDP regime that the youth felt have been mismanaged the country for 16 years. And then Tinubu and APC were presumed to be the new alternative. And then, boom, where we were. So, but then, when they say the youth vote is, what do you call it, should I say, encouraging Peter Obi or supporting Peter Obi, the vote is not monolithic. Right. You see, Nigeria is more or less two countries within one, because you have 12 states in the north implementing Sharia law. But every student of politics knows that there can be multiple conforming laws within a country, but there cannot be two antagonistic laws in one country. So if you look at the Nigerian constitution, and then you put Sharia law, and you do a comparison,
Juxtapose that.
They are antagonistic of each other.
Right.
So, but then, how did you get to the point where Sharia becomes an issue? It's about outlook. Whilst the South is more globalized, more westernized, the North is equally very conservative, and then, I think, more inward-looking. So, security will be a factor. But then let's do a comparison between the Northeast and the Northwest. The Northwest have more voter population than the Northeast. But then, one of the reasons why PDP lost the election in 2015 was because of insecurity in the Northeast. But then, if you look at performance of APC government today, I mean, security-wise, they've done well in the Northeast. But just oppose it to the North Central and the Northwest, that's when you begin to see the, I think, should I say, failures along the line. So security will be a factor when it comes to the northern vote. And then another thing is about, in the north, identity matters more than any other thing.
And that's why I was asking the question, because you have Atiku Abubakar, quite a big trump card for him, I mean, going into the elections, the fact that he identifies with the people. I mean, his choice of running mate also comes from there, correct?
No, his choice of running mate is from the south.
That's from the south, yes. But looking at his identity, as I was talking about, plus, of course, the fact that he comes from the north, correct? I mean, looking at all of these factors, that plays, I mean, comes with some advantage for him.
Well, that would have been an advantage. But if you put Atiku in a bracket with other northern leaders, Atiku is seen to be more liberal. Okay. You remember when the issue of the Deborah incident, the lynching of the Deborah, the lady, the young lady came up? Okay. There was a tweet that had to be deleted because he was condemning the act. And then there was a backlash from the northern core. Yeah. So Atiku, being a northerner, does not really have that kind of northern support, as in that you say, compared to what Buhari has. Buhari has fanatic loyalty in the north, but you can't put him in the context. But then Tinubu, being a southwestern Muslim, tend to look as if, but to a typical northerner, there's no distinction between a liberal northerner like Atiku and a southwestern Muslim. So now let's put their running mate. That's where the running mate begins to become an advantage, right? Here he has a Christian running mate. It appeals to the zoning within the, within the PDP. The zoning that is presumed that APC has disrupted by bringing 2 Muslims. But in 1993, you had also 2 Muslims, Abiola and Kinibi.
Right.
Then Kasim Shettima becomes an advantage to Tinubu's ticket because he's a northerner. He seems to be, more northern than Atiku's liberal image in context, like in quote.
You're doing that relatively.
Yeah, relatively. And then he's also from Borno State. And that's one of the states where APC has had marked improvement. But if you go back to also 2015 and 2019 election, in 2019, PDP did well in the Northeast, that is where Atiku is from, vis-a-vis APC doing well or retaining its, lead in the Northwest. You see the issue?
Right.
So now, when you put the two, it looks more like an open context, even though Atiku is a northerner, as against Tinubu being a southerner. But the other advantage Tinubu's ticket has is the fact that he's coming with a, a northern running mate. And you know, if you quite remember when Yar'Adua was brought on board.
Yes, Tinubu is coming with the northern running mate.
Yes, when Yar'Adua was brought on board, people felt Obasanjo brought Yar'Adua so he could manipulate him to have influence behind the scene because of his poor health.
Right.
Now, if you bring Tinubu with the allegation of he being having a poor health situation, right? It puts, Kashim Shettima on the seat. Because if Tinubu is outside the country, everybody was outside the country and Osibanjo was taking decision. Definitely, Kashim Shettima will have to take decision.
Right.
That still gives the North another advantage. So the North would be more interested in power and identity than the basic issue of bread and butter. Right. And when you put the equation into the bracket, you see that APC's ticket tend to have a lead beyond the fact that Tinubu is a Westerner.
That's your prediction.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Eze, you have some thoughts on that, the northern dynamics?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to make predictions in terms of how candidates will fare.
Yeah.
But I think that there are dynamics actually, and I agree fully with my brother on the studio that it's neither here nor there. There is no ticket in this election that you can consider to be perfect. All of them came with their running mates on the basis of what they are judged to have to be an advantage. Tinubu of APC received a lot of backlash for going on Muslim ticket. But if you look at it probably from a moral perspective or from a religious perspective, you might be right. But if you look at it from his own calculation, political calculation, it is that he felt, as at that time, because P2B was not a force at that time, so he felt that Northwest will be in his kitty. He felt that Southwest will be in his kitty, especially because Buhari is from Northwest and APC controls the entire Northwest, as it were, with the exception of Sokoto State. And then he is from the Southwest, so definitely they will go with him. And he also wanted to disrupt the Northeast, which is supposed to be Atiku's own base. So with that calculation, he probably might be thinking, okay, more about winning the election than any other emotional feeling anybody will come with. But there is a new dynamic, which is the emergence of Mr. P2B. Mr. P2B is appealing to the elites, not the political elites, but the education elites. He's appealing to the younger generation and so on and so forth. So it brings in a new dynamic which makes North Central contestable. A lot of people are thinking that with what is going on, if you look at the educational curve of Nigeria, most of the places where you consider to have high level of literacy, a lot of people are projecting that probably P2B will win the election. So others are saying that any vote, if there are 10 votes for P2B, that if P2B was not on the ballot paper, that 7 would have been Atiku's votes. So if is P2B hurting the two candidates or just hurting the candidacy of Atiku Abubakar, we'll find out tomorrow. But in my opinion, this is one election that I am not sure that any of the candidates can go and sleep and say yes, I'll win this election. Not Tinubu, not Atiku, not P2P.
Bello, your take on this?
Well, I think he has a very important point. North Central will be another place to look at. But then let's also put the North Central in perspective. There are some portions of the North Central that has more affinity to the South, with the South, as against other part of the North Central that has more affinity with the North. So if you put a place like, let's say, Benue State. Benue State is geographically a North Central state.
Right.
But in terms of affinity and cultural-wise, it is largely Christian and more tilted towards the South culturally than anything.
Right.
But if you put places like, let's say, Bauchi or Kwara State, which is Kwara
Bauchi
State.
Is not east. Bauchi is not east.
No.
Let's say Plateau State, for example.
Okay.
Plateau State. You could see that even if you remember the chaos in Jos, the chaos in Jos has a religious coloration, whereas it was just an issue of bread and butter. You know, the Muslims against the Fulani herders against what do you call it. So the Northwest and the North Central will be a very contested zone. But another question we need to look at is, Peter Obi is benefiting from the NSAS movement. And that is why it's very relevant in this.
Is this scientific? Is this a scientific statement?
Well, if you look at the social, if you look at the, what do you call it, the NSAS, it was galvanized on social media. And if you look at Peter Obi's presence on the social media, there has some linkage with that. But then how does it translate that into votes on the ground?
And that's the biggest question.
That's the biggest question.
Facing him.
And then until we go to the polls, you can't tell.
Right.
But then, if you look at places like, but if you look at security-wise in the North Central, APC has equally had a lot of failures and challenges over there. We've seen continuous clashes between farmers and herders. We've seen this attempt to bring the Ruga, what do you call it, reservation. So we've seen a lot of backlash against APC. So the argument that security will have worked for them, security will work only for APC in the Northeast. But the North Central becomes an open card where everyone will poach from the other.
Right.
You get the point?
Yeah.
But another issue we need to look at, the fourth candidate on the list, Kwankwaso.
Okay. You feel he's a force to reckon with?
He may be a wild card.
Why so?
Kano is a vote bank for APC. If you look at the 2015 and 2019 election, but you have a man from Kano contesting. So how does his candidature affect APC's votes in Kano State?
Right.
And how does it undermine Tinubu's advantage? You get the point? And does that push the election to a runoff or not? We can't tell. And then Lagos State is equally, initially Lagos State has one of the, should I say, least voter turnout. Because people hardly vote in Lagos State.
Right.
But this time around, people are voting. What will be the anger? But then if you look at it across board, I think economic-wise, it will have been PDP's advantage.
Okay.
But PDP still represents the 16 years of chaos. And Peter Obi's, what do you call it, argument, when he was governor of Anambra State, he saved more. He's always been arguing about his savings. Right. And then if you look at Nigeria's debt stock today, and all those things, you consider, even economically, Peter Obi stands a chance.
So the biggest question would be, would these the kind of following we are seeing on social media translate into the votes? I guess that's what we are not able to tell as of now, if it would indeed translate into the votes for now. But I also want us to touch on the student population that we're seeing, that new dynamic story, the young voter population also coming up right now. Looking at the fact that they may be very active on social media, are you translating all of that votes to, for instance, Peter Obi?
Well, putting all of that vote in a lump, in a single bag, and allocating it to Peter Obi will quite be very, very, I think it will be extravagant.
Right.
Exaggeration.
Right.
We'll be exaggerating the point, because you need to look at the regional dynamics, okay? A typical Northerner is more moved by identity issue, because Islam is one thing that stirs the pulse of the North. As against an average Southerner who is more concerned about bread and butter, self-actualization. So if you bring a Northerner and a Southerner of the same age, perhaps their worldview or their understanding of events could differ, and that could translate into how they vote. You get the point? So the fact that the youth are banking on Peter Obi does not necessarily mean that every youth is banking on Peter Obi. So I think that is why we have to wait until the election result is announced, and then we do a proper, analysis of the vote he got from the demographic. But then largely we'll say it's benefiting from the youth vote and the anger that is directed towards APC. And to a certain extent, that has not exonerated PDP, because for 16 years they equally contributed their own portion. But I think a bit on the security situation.
Right, okay.
I think a stronger Nigeria means a healthier West Africa. If you recall, the first security challenge we had prior to this era of insurgency in the Sahel was a civil war in Liberia and Sierra Leone. Right. And it took Nigeria's initiative.
To the ECOMOG.
ECOMOG.
Right.
Nigeria taking the lead. But the reason why Nigeria could not deploy in the current situation was that Nigeria itself has its own domestic security issue to address. Right. And that is how come we have multiple international players across the region. Now you have the Russians through the Wagner Group, you have the French, you have the EU, you have the UN, you have multiple actors in the Sahel in West Africa, because the hegemon that would have stepped in to solve the problem himself was having a problem to do with. Right. So a stronger Nigeria is definitely a safety net for the West African sub-region.
Okay, we need to go. Let me take your final words, Dr. Eze.
Well, I think I'm more excited about the new dynamics in the elections than anxious, as it were. I think it's no longer the time when you win party primaries and you go home and sleep and say you have won the election. And I think that my take is that power has shifted. The determinant of power has shifted from the politicians with money bags to the people. And therefore, everybody's focus is now on how to convince the masses to vote for them, as it were.
Kelechukwu, apologies. I thought you were off the line, but let me give you this opportunity as well. I'm sure you've been listening to the take by Doc and Bello in studio. Yes.
Okay, so let me just pick up some things. The first question you asked Dr. Eze on the question around ballots and why people are not looking at the down ballot elections, National Assembly and local government, the state assemblies and the governorship. So SBM did its survey and found that only 35% of respondents answered questions that had to do with the governorship elections. Only 14% answered questions that had to do with the assembly elections. And I think maybe around 20%-ish answered questions that had to do with the National Assembly. And it's historic. It's because power is concentrated at the center in Nigeria. And everybody just looks to the president and forgets that they are lawmakers, except when the lawmakers come to their constituencies, because they hardly do. And so you don't see them, and so you just hear them in Abuja debating laws. So people do not focus on them, because even in the state level, it feels like the governors control the State House of Assembly members as well. So people just tend to see what's happening at the center than what's happening right within their constituency. It's been like that in Nigeria. Then on the security question, so our poll kind of found that 48% of the respondents which we interviewed say that they've experienced electoral violence. You had 4 of the states in the Northeast getting more than that, and you had about 11 of the states in the North completely getting more than 48% of respondents saying that they've experienced issues around security. The security and the security question and the cash crunch are going to be defining factors for voter turnout. And it all hinges on voter turnout, because we are seeing Tinubu winning Lagos and Kano, and then winning most of the votes in the Northwest. And the Northwest has a lot of the votes in the Northwest, rather, not most, because we see the Christian minorities voting for him. And the Northwest has 23 million registered voters. So we are seeing a lot of that. So the PVC collection rates came out yesterday. Lagos is first, Kano is second, and Kaduna is third. Kano and Kaduna are in the Northwest. And the Northwest, Kaduna, has a large Christian population that are determined not to vote for APC and are determined not to vote for PDP. Because the ethnicity and religion really is going to play a deciding factor in this role. 30% of respondents we polled predicted religion to be a problem, religion to be a factor for them, and another 20% were ambivalent. So that's like how? So we see those things playing a big role. And like Dr. Eze said, we predict a runoff. We predict a runoff. And it's very close because Buhari is not on the ballot. No general is on the ballot. And Atiku is the only serial runner who is on the ballot.
Okay then. Bello?
Well, I think for me, the election is actually being seen as a transition. We have the class of 1966, those who benefited from the coup, as the past generals.
Right.
Apart from Jonathan, I think past Nigerian leaders had one or the other been linked with the coup, either directly or indirectly. Because Yar'Adua, for example, has his own brother being part of the elite, General Yar'Adua. So now there's those things, and then when you put this candidate on the list, apart from Peter Obi, Kwankwaso, Tinubu, Atiku, all emerged out of the class of 1993. Those who were young politicians. At that time, Tinubu was in the Senate.
Right.
So they came to the national fore because they were resisting the annulment of the election, and then they were also campaigning for restoration of democracy. So people see it to be a transition because Buhari is the last of the class of 1966 with military background, as against, with the exception of Obi, the current guys being what you call it, the class of 1993. So people are seen to be like an end of one era and probably the beginning of the climax of another era. But what I want to see is that I want to see if perhaps the outcome through the large galvanization of the youth by Peter Obi would disrupt what will have been a succession from one class to another to something new that we've never seen before. And then probably what will be the impact of Peter Obi's, emergence as a third force to reckon with in Nigeria on other upcoming elections across West Africa.
Interesting dynamics there. And you agree with the point about the runoff?
Well, I think relatively we could be heading for a runoff because this is the first time in Nigeria that you have an open election where you can't just go to bed and think you've won the election after winning the primary, as Dr. Ogochukwu said. But then, who can tell? So I think, but even if it goes for a runoff, it puts the ruling party in a disadvantage. But one thing about the what you call undecided voters, most opinion polls that gave Obi the lead equally had huge undecided voters. They could do two things. One, out of fear of instability, they could just vote for continuity and they stick with the government, not because it has performed, but out of fear of instability and disruption. Or secondly, alternatively, out of anger and frustration with the ruling party, they give their vote to any other person that seems to be an alternative, even if he's not really a credible alternative. So we wait to see what happens. Is it a continuity or the emergence of an alternative?
Well, interesting dynamics. We'll find out in the next 24 hours when that process starts. But it's going to be a long weekend and the next week as well, because obviously looking at the population of over 90 million, you would obviously expect that this electoral exercise in Nigeria will travel really, really far. But we'll bring you updates here on the Joy News channel. We're taking a break here on The Pulse. We'll be right back. Thanks to Dr. Chukwuemeka Eze and to all the team, including Bello, who also joined us in studio here. Thank you. We'll be back.